Hello, and welcome to our educational video, Butterflies in My Stomach, Lupus and the Gut Microbiome. I'm Annika Hazlitt, a member of the Board of Directors at Kaleidoscope Fighting Lupus, and your host. The microbiome, the bacteria that naturally live in our digestive tract, have recently been a major focus of lupus research. How can bacteria and our overall gut health affect lupus and other autoimmune conditions? Here to explain the latest research, we have Dr. Teri Greiling, a practicing dermatologist, associate professor, and associate program director of research at the Oregon Health and Science University School of Medicine. Dr. Greiling will highlight some of her cutting-edge research on the relationships between digestive health, the microbiome, and lupus. We will also hear from Arnita Roberts-Christie. Arnita is a registered nurse and patient engagement liaison with GlaxoSmithKline, and she will add the importance of rest and sleep to the discussion of gut health and the microbiome. Before we hear from both our experts, I'd like to thank our presenting sponsor, GSK, for their generous support in making this program possible. And now, Dr. Teri Greiling.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation to speak today on one of my favorite topics, which is lupus, skin, and the microbiome. So I'll start with my disclosure slide. I don't have any conflicts of interest related to lupus or the microbiome, but I do have some research funding pharmaceutical companies to study rare skin diseases. So today I'm going to talk about microbiome and lupus. And just a few words about me. So I am a medical doctor and a scientist. I wear both hats, and this talk will be about both of those things. I'm at Oregon Health and Science University, and I take care of patients in multiple locations there, including a shared rheumatology, dermatology clinic. And since I wear many hats, of course, I'm also a mother and a daughter and a wife and a friend, and so lots of things to work with. So going into lupus and the microbiome, the first question starting with, well, what is lupus and what in the immune system goes awry in lupus? And it's a difficult question to answer. It's always a very complicated diagram when you try to map it. And I think that's because the answer is really everything. So it starts with a mix of genetic changes and environmental factors. Together, those lead to altered cell death and then really immune activation so that patients' immune systems make antibodies and T cells, plasmacytoid dendritic cells, all these cells that come together and create the inflammatory response that causes the cell damage in lupus. And so I think the traditional view of thinking about why lupus occurs is that the immune system is making a mistake and getting overactivated and attacking people's bodies. And I want to turn that paradigm a little bit and think about the role the microbiome plays in that, and that some of these immune responses may not be an error, that people's bodies with lupus may actually be reacting to certain microbes that are part of the microbiome that's creating some of this immune activation. And so that's what I want to tell you about today. So launching into then, well, what is the microbiome? So that term is used to describe all of the creatures, all of the microbes that live on and in us. So that includes bacteria, fungus, viruses, other single-celled organisms, and they live on every body site. So they cover every square inch of our skin. They live in our whole digestive tract, from the mouth to the stomach to the intestines. They live in the lungs. They live in the bladder, urethra, and the vagina, every site where our body interacts with the outside world. And so, of course, the question is, well, what are they doing there? Now, there are different types of relationships that we have with our microbiome. Traditionally, we thought about microbes as infections, as pathogens that come in, attack our bodies, and then our immune system attacks back to get rid of them and clear the infection. But the idea of the microbiome is that we have all these what are called commensal species that live on us all the time and are not hurting us. And so a commensal relationship is one that the microbes may be taking nutrients or living off of us, and they're neutral to us. And even many of them are what we call mutualists, that they provide useful things to us. They synthesize essential vitamins. They help us digest our food. Now, another concept that's becoming more popular lately is the idea of a pathobiont. And that is a microbe that in some people, in some situations, is completely harmless, but in other situations can overgrow and help lead to disease. And I compare it to an invasive species. So if we think of our bodies as similar to the Earth's global ecosystem, that you think of something like, I was thinking of an example of the brown marmorated stink bug, which is a native to China and Japan, but has now come to the US and is eating our fruit crops and coming into people's homes and has become an invasive species. So you can think of a pathobiont microbe in the body like that. Now, as I said, these microbes are everywhere. There's about equal numbers of bacteria and human cells in one person. And that leads to the question, we hear a lot about the microbiome in the last number of years, and why is this topic so popular right now? And the answer to that is really technology. That whereas we didn't used to have the technology to understand what microbes are there, now we do. So the old way of studying microbes is you have to use a petri dish and grow every individual bacteria. And each bug has its own mix of nutrients that it likes and different gases that it wants to breathe. And that is impossible. There are so many species that we just can't grow. And so now we use genetic sequencing, and that's really why the advent of the microbiome study has become popular. We can take a swab of some site that's colonized by microbes and extract the DNA and run that through a high throughput genetic sequencer, and from that get back a list of genetic sequences and map those back to the bacteria or viruses or fungi that are there. And so that's now gotten easy and relatively cheap to do, and has allowed us to really understand what's there, and then now start to take that next step of, well, what are they doing? Now, the type of bacteria and other microbes that live in each location on the body really depends on that location. So if you think about it again as a global ecosystem, the space between the toes may be like a tropical beach environment, and inside of the stomach is more like a boiling volcanic lake. And so that location is very specific down to, tiny little changes, for example, where you are in the skin. So this diagram is showing where they took a couple of volunteers and they mapped 400 sites on the skin on the outside of the body. Every square inch they took a different swab. And this is just showing 3 representative bacteria. So the first one is staph. And you can see the red color means there was a lot of staph there, and the blue means there was just a little bit. And if it's dark, there was nothing. And so if you look at the bottom of the feet, you see lots of red dots lighting up, but as you move up the ankle, that kind of fades away. And the same with the middle column is Propionibacterium, which is acne is one, the bacteria that causes acne is one species of that. And so you see it lighting up in the cheek and the temple and the forehead, and then not as much, on the arms and legs and hands and feet. And so our relationship with these bacteria starts at birth and goes on for your whole life. And you need this relationship with your microbiome. It actually helps train your immune system on how to function. Once the baby is in the womb, it's a sterile environment, but the second the baby emerges, so whether that be through the birth canal and the skin is colonized with all the microbes that are part of the birth canal, or by C-section, the baby is colonized with just sort of what's floating in the air of the room on the skin. And so that's a difference at birth. And that normalizes already by 2 weeks of age, but there are many who believe that that early window of what we call dysbiosis, so having an abnormal balance of microbes, then can affect your response to health and disease throughout your life. Then, of course, babies start to eat, and their digestive tract is colonized by microbes from breast milk or from formula, and then the diet and the foods we eat that for the rest of our life goes on to influence what types of microbes are there in our digestive tract. And everything else we do, from exercise, affects our microbiome. Disease states definitely alter that balance. Aging, hormones, drugs that we take, medications, where we live in the world, all of these things affect our microbiome throughout life. And just to go back to the idea of medications that affect our microbiome, this is a figure from one of my favorite papers that came out in the journal Nature 2 years ago. And they did this great experiment where they took 40 common bacteria that live in the gut, and they basically fed those bacteria all the 1,200 different medications that are available in this country, and saw, how does it alter these bacteria. And they saw that there were 200 medications that were not antibiotics, but actually killed at least one of those gut bacterial species. And so examples of this include things that are commonly used to treat patients in lupus. So methotrexate, azathioprine, proton pump inhibitors, which block heartburn, calcium channel blockers, which treat high blood pressure, treatments for diabetes. There are a lot of things on this list. But it's also important to know that that's not always necessarily a bad thing. So it could even be the way that they alter the microbiome is part of the reason why the medication works. And so one recent example of that was a study looking at statins, which are a type of medication for high cholesterol. And they saw that people who take statins have a rebalancing of their gut microbiome, which appears to lead to the decrease in total body inflammation and actually benefit of the body of taking that medication. So on this theme of we influence our bacteria and they influence us. So this diagram, what it's trying to show is a cross-section through the intestine. And you see some different bacteria that are living in there, the green, red, and yellow microbes. And there's some little green hexagons too. And that's supposed to be food, basically, that's not digested yet. So a starch in your intestine. And then the purple structure is the blood vessels that drain the intestine. So it's the portal vein. So as you digest all your food, it ends up into the blood and then it goes straight to the liver. And then the liver gets to try to take out all the toxins and things that shouldn't be in your body. And then the liver feeds the rest of your body all of those nutrients. And so some examples of how the bacteria are affecting this is the bacteria then help us digest food. So when food gets to the large intestine that hasn't been digested, some of the bacteria are able to help digest that for us. And so you see examples of then those nutrients getting into your system that are aided by bacterial digestion. And then bacteria release other byproducts. So they eat our food and then they release their own, our waste products from bacteria, but maybe something like essential vitamins for us as they digest nutrients. So those may be good things or they may be bad things. So there's also evidence that bacteria release harmful free fatty acids. And so that's another thing in patients with lupus. Fortunately, as we get better at helping patients with lupus survive, they then, mortality is mainly from heart disease. And so there is evidence to show that the free fatty acids are higher in the bloodstream of people with lupus, and that contributes to heart disease. And a lot of those can come from certain bacteria in the gut. And then another way bacteria can directly influence us, again, coming from the gut, is the idea of translocation, that there are certain situations in which the bacteria can actually escape directly through the wall of the intestine into the bloodstream of this circulation and end up in the liver. And it's not the same as a traditional infection as we would think about it, because if you go to the hospital with a total body infection, you might take a blood sample and look for bacteria to grow in it. But this is blood that's only circulating from the intestines to the liver. So it's not something we can detect. But what I'm about to tell you about is this idea that that this may be happening to us all the time, but may be harmful in lupus. And so it's a big shift to think about lupus as an infectious disease. And I'm not saying it's entirely an infection, but there are certain bacteria that may help activate the immune system in lupus. And so this is an example of work that was done from this group that I worked with when I was at Yale. And it's translocation of a bacteria called Enterococcus gallinarum. And the study started from this observation by Dr. Manfredo Vieira that we had some mice that have a genetic change, and these mice develop lupus. So they develop antibodies that attack their tissue. They get kidney disease that looks like lupus nephritis, and eventually they develop antiphospholipid syndrome, which is something that people with lupus, some people have, where they develop blood clots that are very dangerous. And so these mice, when we gave them antibiotics to get rid of a lot of their gut bacteria, they survived. And it was a dramatic change that normally in this graph is showing at 30 weeks of age, about 80% of the mice have already passed away. When you give them antibiotics, 80% are still alive. And so we asked, well, what is it? What bacteria is driving this change? And so we found in these mice, they had a leaky gut. So their intestinal walls sort of allowed things to pass through more easily. And this allowed the Enterococcus gallinarum bacteria specifically was able to get through, escape into the liver and spleen, and there it was able to activate a lot of these immune responses that we see in lupus and create the autoantibodies and create the inflammation. And furthermore, what's really promising, again, this hasn't this part hasn't been done in humans, but the mice were given a vaccine against this bacteria, and that actually protected them equally as well as giving them antibiotics. And so the evidence in people, of course, these are not studies that you can easily do with human patients, but we were able to obtain some liver biopsy tissue from lupus patients who were undergoing liver biopsies for another reason, and we're actually able to see this bacteria was present. We had 3 samples from lupus patients, but that was present in all 3 patients. So, more to come. This is sort of recent experimental evidence, but that this could be one of the bacteria that is activating the immune system in lupus. So this next example is sort of a similar idea of translocation of bacteria that shouldn't otherwise be there. And so, with this success in the first group of mice, so we looked at another type of mice that develop lupus, and again saw escape of a certain bacteria into the liver and spleen, but this time it was a different bacteria. It was one called Lactobacillus reuteri. And similarly, if we colonized the mouse guts with more Lactobacillus reuteri, they got sicker, but there was a way to fix it. Dr. Zagara Ruiz, who led this project, was really excited about the idea of how can we change the diet? How can we fix this with food? And so he fed the mice a special diet that was high in what's called resistant starch. So it's a type of starch that you find in oats, in raw potatoes, and actually cooled potatoes. So if you think about if you make Thanksgiving dinner and you have a big pot of mashed potatoes and you put them in the fridge and they form that kind of gelatinous congealed mass, that's the starch that you're looking for. It's also in green bananas and certain legumes. And so it was previously, other studies have shown that's a really healthy type of starch that promotes certain gut bacteria. And so he was able to show that if we give the mice this starch, they actually also had fewer lupus symptoms and got better. And so what he is able to show is that that type of starch helped certain good bacteria that are called Clostridialis and inhibited the growth of this Lactobacillus reuteri. Now, human studies have not been done with these different bacteria, but so Lactobacillus reuteri specifically is a type of probiotic that you can buy at any health food store. And this was the one that seemed to be promoting making lupus worse in these mice. And so I'll say more about probiotics later, but it makes me nervous that a lot of these probiotics just haven't been tested in people with with autoimmunity. Okay, so changing tacks to some different examples of where the microbiome and lupus interacts. So this one I'll call a case of mistaken identity. And the idea is that when you mount an immune response toward a bacteria, you start making antibodies against that bacteria. But there are certain proteins, certain components of bacteria that are so important to function that we share the same proteins with bacteria. So potentially, if you mounted an immune response against this one part of the bacteria that you share with it, then those antibodies could turn around and attack us as well. And so this idea is called cross-reactivity. And we do have examples in health and disease of this happening. So actually, rheumatic fever is exactly that. So in rheumatic fever, you get a strep infection, you make antibodies against the strep bacteria, and then those antibodies cross-react with your heart, and that's what creates rheumatic fever. There's another example called Guillain-Barré syndrome that similar things happen. Now, those examples that we know of are where you get an infection, your body clears the infection, and then you get this short-lived autoimmune syndrome that then also goes away with some time. But what about the microbiome? These are commensals that stay with us for our whole life. So if one of those was driving a cross-reactive immune response, and we always have it, maybe that's what could be driving the chronic autoimmunity that we see in diseases like lupus. And so work that I did is proposing that Rho60 is one such protein that we have and certain bacteria share and could be driving this response. About 50 or 60% of people with lupus have antibodies against this Rho protein. And we know it's really important in lupus. Actually, you can find antibodies even 5 years before people have symptoms of their lupus. It can be an indication that it's coming, and it sets off this inflammatory cascade. And so I was able to find about 25 different bacteria that are part of our own microbiome that make this same Rho protein, and that it's very similar to our own human protein. And so then experimentally, we were able to take antibodies and and T cells from patients with lupus and show that it really couldn't tell the difference between the bacterial protein and the human protein. And so all of that work really supports the idea that a healthy immune attack on bacteria can lead to these autoimmune responses in genetically susceptible people. And so I always think of it about it as a skin, because some of these bacteria are actually skin bacteria. And so this image on the slide is of a patient with what's called subacute cutaneous lupus, and they get this very characteristic rash on the chest and back, and it's in this V-shaped distribution in those locations every time. And these patients have a lot of sun sensitivity, and so the reason that it's on the chest and back is always blamed on sun. But if you look at this image, I don't think this man was wearing a backless V-neck t-shirt and went into the sun, and that's exactly why the rash showed up there. And so this location of the rash is actually the same location of where you have these very oil-rich follicles on your chest and back, where one of the bacteria that makes roe lives. And so I really think that that bacteria on our skin could be driving the immune response that creates the rash. And there's some other examples of this cross-reactive response that have come out recently. So patients with lupus nephritis, kidney disease, had a bacteria called Ruminococcus navis in their stool and seemed to make antibodies against it that correlated with activity of their lupus nephritis and what's called double-stranded DNA antibodies that really is important in that disease. And there's another example, lupus patients who get antiphospholipid syndrome, again, this blood clotting disease, have antibodies to something called beta-2 glycoprotein 1 protein. And there's another bacteria called Roseburia intestinalis that has a little piece of it that looks very similar to the human beta-2 glycoprotein 1, and that the antibodies can cross-react between those two different things and can drive that disease. Okay, well, a question that I commonly get is, well, what can I do? Do I need to be taking probiotics? How can I promote the health of my microbiome? And so the definition of a probiotic is a live microbe that confers a health benefit on the host when administered in adequate amounts. But then these are supplements, and so based on the laws in our country, supplements have to be tested for safety, but they don't have to prove that they work. They just have to prove that they don't kill you. And so there are only a few strains of bacteria, and I have them all listed here. These are all of the different bacterial species that can be used in a probiotic because they've shown to be safe. So there's two main problems with that. And so the first one is that out of the thousands of bacteria that influence health and disease, these are pretty minor players. And so taking any one of these probably isn't going to make that much difference in your overall health. And then number two, that safety hasn't really been established in people with autoimmunity, what that does in the long term. Sure, you take this probiotic and you don't immediately die from an infection, but could it be promoting the wrong balance of your microbiome? And that just has not been studied at all. And so from the evidence in mice that if we feed them more of that probiotic, that their lupus gets worse, I kind of really don't recommend any probiotics in patients with specific diseases that hasn't been tested. So we don't know yet on how to manipulate the microbiome to really promote health and disease, but I think there's a lot of promise for this for the future. And so can we continue to establish what certain foods can promote the healthy microbes to outcompete the bad ones that we don't want? We're hopeful that microbiome transplants will be good. So fecal microbiome transplants are currently used in the hospital for people with something called C. difficile, a type of bacterial infection. And actually the first study just came out recently of using fecal transplants for people with Crohn's disease and inflammatory bowel disease, and really showed some great benefit in that situation. And maybe we'll be able to do skin microbiome transplants as well to help the cutaneous manifestations. Maybe we'll be able to develop targeted antibiotics if there's just a single bacteria you want to get rid of, but not sort of get the rest of your microbiome out of balance. Hopefully that's another option for the future. As the one study showed, maybe we'll be able to find a vaccine to target certain bacteria and delete them from your system. And maybe even the hope of phage therapy. So a phage is a virus that actually infects bacteria. And so we could make all the bad bacteria sick and get them out of our system. I have a lot of hope that this will be safer ways to treat lupus and other autoimmune diseases in the future. So that's the end of that section. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Greiling, not only for describing your research, but also for that new perspective on gut health. Next, Arnita Roberts-Christie, a registered nurse and patient advocate, will share her thoughts and practical advice on the importance of sleep and rest related to gut health and the microbiome. Hi, Arnita. Thanks for joining us.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for the introduction. My name is Arnita Roberts-Christie, and as introduced, I am a patient engagement liaison with GSK. My role here today is not to take the place of you having a very open and honest conversation with your healthcare provider. However, it is to pique your interest or to empower you to ask questions that you may not have thought about asking before. Hopefully, this is not your first time meeting me, because Kaleidoscope Fighting Lupus has a number of different educational resources online in which I have had the blessed privilege of being a part of. I am so grateful to the leadership of Teri and Greg, and just everything that they do is done in excellence, and I am very grateful for this opportunity to be before you to talk a little bit about. I know, like, the microbiome is so important. What is our digestive system doing as we are living with lupus? But you know what also is important? Is rest and recuperation, as well as nutrition. So that's where our focus is going to be today. In front of you, you see the slide that is titled Living with Lupus, Managing the Lupus Lifestyle. And so how do you manage your lifestyle both internally and externally? Hopefully, by the end of today's presentation, you will have some tips on what you can do to help you manage your lupus lifestyle. So let's get started. Your role is so important to your lupus journey. You know how your body feels. You know when it feels great, and you know when it feels not so great. Despite what anyone else tells you, listen to your body, both physically and mentally. You understand when something's not quite right. You may not be able to verbalize it or to express it in medical terms, but however you can communicate, let someone know something is just not quite right. That's one of the things as a nurse that I've said when I was in the hospital, and I would say to a physician, I don't know exactly what's wrong with this patient, but something's not quite right. And my gut feeling never steered me wrong. So listen to your intuition, as we call it. You play a critical role in this. And so you and your healthcare provider together will come up with the best plan for you as you live this lupus journey. And so being an engaged patient has 4 different parts to it. It's educating yourself, it's communicating with your healthcare team, it's monitoring and tracking your symptoms, and it is taking ownership of your health and lifestyle. And you are doing all 4 of those just by being here today. We know about the visible symptoms of lupus. We know about what it looks like to have hair loss. We know about what it looks like to have a rash on our face or on some other part of our body. But I also want to remind you there are invisible symptoms of lupus. There is the fever, or when your blood has disorders in it, and we call that anemia, when your blood levels are low. We also know that organ damage can occur on the inside, where there may be inflammation of your kidneys, and that, because our kidneys have the responsibility of controlling our blood pressure and how we release toxins out of your body, if there's inflammation in the kidneys, that will show up in our blood work, and that will show up in our urine. And so if we have inflammation in our heart or in our lungs, that will show up in terms of chest pain or shortness of breath. And if we have inflammation in our digestive system, that can show up as constipation or diarrhea. It can also show up as what we call epigastric pain, and that's pain that occurs in the lower part of our esophagus. And sometimes you might have a burning sensation, and that is when fluids from our stomach are coming back up into our esophagus. And so when lupus is inflamed in our gastrointestinal system, those are some of the things or some of the symptoms that you may experience. Fatigue is something else that you may experience. It happens on the inside of our body, and boy, don't you feel it on the outside. It happens, and you may not be able to do the things or have the activity level that you had. So I often tell my patients to have a scale of what your fatigue feels like. If you're feeling great, you're able to cook, you're able to go to work, you're able to hang out with friends, your fatigue level might be like a 2 or something. But if you are exhausted when you just put your feet on the outside of the bed, or you go from the bed to the commode or the toilet and you have to sit down because you're too tired to get into the shower, that may be when your fatigue is like an 8 or a 9. So have a scale. Let your village or let your support system know what you are feeling on a daily basis. And that's a way that they can know what to expect from you on a daily basis. If your fatigue is a 2 and you can do all of the things that you like to do, great. Let them know, hey, I'm all in. But if your fatigue is not, where you want it to be, it might be like an 8 or a 9, and you are exhausted. Let your village, let your caretakers know, let your physician know what that feels like. And that is the only way, when you communicate those feelings, that's the only way that you can get the support that you need. Know that you are not alone with this extra amount of tiredness. Know that 80 to 90% of those of you that are living with lupus experience this level of fatigue. So make sure that you are sharing this information. I want to spend just a few minutes about brain fog. Know that you are not alone when you feel a little bit more confused than usual, or you're not able to remember the things that you used to remember, or you're having a difficult time concentrating. Know that 50 to 80% of those of you living with lupus also experience this brain fog. It is very real. Example, you're at the physician's office. A doctor walks in, Arnita, I want to see you back in 3 months, and that way we'll check your blood work, we'll see how you're feeling, you'll bring in your journal to me, and I can read and see how you've been feeling since the last time you were here. Okay, doctor, I'll be back in 3 months. A few minutes pass by, the nurse walks in. Arnita, when does the doctor want to see you back? And you get this blank stare. Sometimes we call it like the deer in headlights stare. It just looks at you and you're like, yeah, the doctor did come in and I forgot. I don't remember. And it could have been just a few minutes ago. And that's okay. That's where that brain fog is. That's where inflammation has reached the small blood vessels of your brain and has made it so that your memory is impacted. That's why I encourage you to write down what someone is sharing with you, or even bring someone with you to the doctor's office. That's a really, really helpful way for you to remember what you need to remember. We're talking about the microbiome, so let's talk a little bit about nutrition. I love this picture of this young lady because she's got a pot, and I'm guessing that she's cooking up something really, really good in that pot. She's got her peppers, her yellow peppers, maybe even a green pepper and some green leafy vegetable. Healthy nutrition doesn't have to be hard. Someone says, I want you to eat a healthy diet or have a healthy lifestyle. And you might think, oh my goodness, I have to go to the farmer's market and I only can buy vegetables and fruits from there, or I have to go to the all-natural store and I can only buy foods from there. Not necessarily true. You can go to your local grocery store and shop on the outer aisles of the grocery store. That's where you will find your fruits and your vegetables and your lean meats. On the inner aisles of the grocery store is where you'll find your processed foods. Processed foods are not as nutritious for the body as fresh fruits and vegetables. I'm going to say that again. Processed foods, foods that you find in packages, are not as nutritious as fruits and vegetables that you find on the outer aisles of the grocery store. You might say, well, I do my shopping, my grocery shopping at Walmart or Target or one of those other kind of stores, and that's okay too. They now also have sections of fruits and vegetables. Those aisles where they're long, those are where you're finding your processed food. So as much as you can, try and stay away from processed foods. Eating well can help with nutrition-related chronic diseases like obesity, heart disease, high blood pressure, osteoporosis, and other diseases. Eating nutritious food can help your body give your cells the nutrition that it needs to help you have the energy that you need to live your best lupus life. So I love this particular picture because the whole family is involved in eating healthy. And you will be surprised if you live alone. Sometimes if you have a smartphone, push that button and turn on FaceTime. Cook with someone. Or if you have an Android, I understand there's an app called Duo that you can use. I'm not advocating for either of them. But what I am saying are there are other ways, even when you live in an apartment by yourself, that you can cook with other people. There are cooking shows. There are, you can Google something and it will share with you so that you don't have to feel alone when you are doing your best to eat healthy. And so there are a few general tips. Know your calorie needs. Talk to your healthcare provider about what it means to count your calories, or what it means to take in enough calories, or making sure that you're taking in the right amount of calories so that you're not taking in too many. And the amount of calories, we want to balance that with our activity level. When we take in too many calories and we don't have enough of an activity level, that can lead us to gaining more weight. And that gaining more weight can be very difficult on the joints and the bones of those of us that are living with chronic diseases, especially lupus or osteoporosis. And so we want to have a balance, the amount of calories that you take in with the amount of exercise that you engage in. Strive for a balanced plate that includes fruits and vegetables and grains and proteins, lean meats, and fat-free or low-dairy food. So when you look at your plate, does it have a balance? And I often look at plates of my patients and I tell them to look for colors. Does your plate have nice green and reds and yellows and oranges? That can be obtained by fresh fruits and vegetables and lean meats. And so look at your plate and see if it has some of those, and be mindful again of processed foods and that they may be higher in sodium. If inflammation has attacked our kidneys, we do not need foods that are high in sodium. And you think, well, how do I know if foods are high in sodium? You can look at the back of the package and see what the sodium content is. Or another way is if you eat a certain food and then you go to put on a piece of jewelry like a ring and you're like, I can't get that ring on my finger, or I can't quite get my foot into a shoe. And it may mean that an increased amount of sodium for some foods that you may have been eating has now come into your extremities, and clinically in medicine we say we're holding on to fluid. And so we don't want to hold on to fluid. We want that fluid to go outside of our body. And so understanding what vitamins your body might need. The best way to understand that is to talk to your healthcare provider. Say, I would like to eat a little bit healthier than I have been eating. and they might tell you to take what's called a diet history. That means you are writing down what you eat from morning when you wake up until you go to bed, and you are writing down everything. Everything, Arnita? Yes, everything. That cup of coffee, those candies that you snuck in, that piece of gum, that extra bag of potato chips, that apple, that banana, everything that you're eating, and you're going to write it down for a period of time. That will help your healthcare provider know what you're eating, what your calorie intake is, and what your body may or may not like. So talk to your doctor, or if they may have a nutritionist on staff, about what is right for you. What is right for you may not be right for someone else. We often say in the lupus community, one person with lupus is one person with lupus. And so make sure that you are eating a healthy intake of what is right for your body. I didn't mention this before, but GSK has a social media presence. We have a Facebook, an Instagram, a Twitter, a number of different resources that patients can go to and leave a message of a question or a message of encouragement. And that is all left on a program that we called Us in Lupus. And so at the end of this presentation, I'm going to show you some QR codes where you can go straight to our Us in Lupus website. And if you miss the QR codes, you can definitely write down the words usinlupus.com, all one word, and you can type that into Chrome or Edge or Safari. You can type it into there and go to it. But this particular lupus warrior left a message, and he or she said, keep a log of your symptoms. Watch what you eat and drink. Watch what you eat and drink. When there is a symptom, be sure to log what you've eaten so you can track your flares. So understand what you eat can sometimes cause a flare, and what you drink can sometimes cause a flare. What we do know is drinking a lot of water is very, very good for your body, whether you have a chronic disease or not. So anything other than water, it has the opportunity to cause a flare. So just when you're doing that diet history and you're writing down everything you are eating and drinking, everything that goes into the mouth, everything, make sure that you write it down and share that with your healthcare provider. I want to spend a few minutes talking about sleep. Sleep has a very restorative factor for the body. And what do you mean, Arnita, by restorative? We are moving these bodies all day from sun up to sundown. The body then needs time to rest. And when it does rest, when it is asleep, there are chemical processes that go on inside our body that gives it a part to rejuvenate, to kind of re-get the energy that we have just put out all day long. When your body does not get the proper amount of rest, the proper amount of sleep, the proper timing to rejuvenate, that has an impact on the next day. It has an impact if your body is ready to face the next day. And so a good night's sleep is so critically important. We say here it is essential for restoration and recovery within your body. The timing, the duration, or the amount, how long you sleep, and the quality of your sleep is very different for you, for me, or anyone else that you're sitting next to in the room. So what's important is that you find out what's best for your body. If you have a day where you do not have to wake up by your alarm clock and you have a little extra time in the morning, I would encourage you, before you go to bed, to don't put on your alarm clock and see how long you stay asleep. It may surprise you. You may usually say, oh, I'm a morning person. I wake up at 5:30 every morning and I go. But this particular morning, you did not set the alarm clock. And you were surprised to find out that you did not wake up until 7:30. And you're like, your body says, oh, thank you, Arnita. I needed that extra sleep. Who knew? But you can find that out if you try it. And so I encourage you, try and see how much extra your body might need. Sleep can affect your metabolism. It can, believe it or not, affect your weight. It can affect your immune function. We know that lupus is a disease that affects our immune system. It's an autoimmune disease. And so we want our immune system functioning at 110% capacity. Can we help our immune system? Absolutely. One of the ways we can help is by putting in nutritious food. Another way is by getting the sleep that we need to restore our body. And that will help our overall quality of life. So here are a couple tips to help you get some restorative sleep. Tips to help you sleep better. So see how much sleep you actually need. Remember, I challenge you. Turn off that alarm clock one day and see how much extra sleep you do get. It may surprise you. Your doctor can also help you decide how much sleep your body needs. Keep a schedule. I often encourage my patients to keep a journal, not only of your triggers, your flares, your health journal, but also what you're eating and how much sleep you're getting. Create a very sleep-friendly room. And what does that mean? Oh my goodness, that means turning off the television as well as your phone an hour before you want to go to sleep. An hour before? Absolutely. So if that last show that you're watching is off at 10 o'clock, that means that you are planning to go to sleep by 11 o'clock. If you want to go to sleep earlier, then you need to set the stage for sleep. Relaxing music often helps people. Turning down the lights helps. Turning off the phone helps. You need to create an atmosphere where there's decreased electronics or no electronics. Some of us like the temperature a little bit cooler in the room, so you may need to adjust the temperature in your room and snuggle up with more blankets if that works for you. Darken your room and create a relaxing atmosphere. You need to train your brain to say, Arnita, you are going to sleep at 10 o'clock tonight. What do I need to do starting at 8:30 or 9 to help me get ready for 10 o'clock? Think about it. Do I need to text everyone and say, listen, I'm going to bed tonight at 10 o'clock. I'm turning off my phone at 9 o'clock. That might work. Be mindful of naps. So if you plan, or if you are someone that needs a nap or you want to take a nap, make sure it's about 30 to 45 minutes, but make sure it's far enough away from the time that you want to get that full restorative sleep, okay? Plan to sleep, again, just about 30 to 45 minutes. This says 30 to 60, but well before your bedtime, well before the time that you want that restorative sleep. This lupus journey is not an easy one. You are not alone on this lupus journey. I want you to practice some opportunities where you appreciate where you are. Appreciate that, yes, you have lupus, but lupus doesn't have to have you. Get the support system that you need. Involve everyone around you, whether it's your coworkers, it's your church members, your village. I call it a village, and that's everyone around you that can be there to help support you. Maybe it's your children, maybe it's your parents. If you live alone, maybe it's your neighbor next door. But get a support system that can help you on those days when you are flaring and your fatigue level might be an 8 or a 9. Dealing with new and changing ups and downs of lupus is very challenging. And we want you, both at GSK and Kaleidoscope Fighting Lupus, we want you to live your best lupus life. And so we are trying to give you the tools that can help you to do that. This is a slide where we have the QR codes. And so you see 4 QR codes in front of you. To the very far left, it's a QR code to learn more about symptom tracking. So if you have your smartphone, take it up to the screen and you'll see that it'll put yellow brackets around the QR code. It might say open in Chrome, open in Safari, or open in Edge. Press that area and then you'll scroll up because now you are on the Us in Lupus website. You'll scroll up, put in your email address, and you can download this information. On the very far right, it says, sign up to receive a Lupus Warriors Guide in Uncertain Times. So I encourage you, take a look at the usinlupus.com website. You'll find that there are a number of different resources that you can download and that you can utilize to help you live your best lupus life. I want to say thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for being an engaged patient through education. Thank you for spending time to learn more and to be empowered enough to ask the question of how you can take care of your body. How can you advocate for yourself? How can you live your best lupus life while you're on this journey? So from GlaxoSmithKline, I thank you. Again, I want to thank my friends at Kaleidoscope Fighting Lupus for this opportunity. Thank you so much again for joining us.
Thank you, Arnita, for the tools and practical advice. We so appreciate your thoughtful perspective. This brings us to the end of our video, Butterflies in My Stomach, Lupus and the Microbiome. Thanks again to our presenters, Dr. Teri Greiling and Arnita Roberts-Christie. We hope you found the information and advice from these experts helpful. Once again, a special thanks to our presenting sponsor, GSK, for their help in making this program possible. And finally, we want to thank you for watching. We encourage you to visit our website, kaleidoscopefightinglupus.org, and follow our social media platforms for the latest lupus news, lupus facts, program information, award-winning articles, and so much more. Thanks for spending time with us, and remember, you are not alone. I'm Arnita Roberts-Christie for Kaleidoscope Fighting Lupus. Please, take care.